Hello and welcome to a Nautical Institute webinar. Today we are going to be talking about pilot ladder safety, which is absolutely critical. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Nautical Institute, but for those who might not be, we are an international professional body and we help our members with professional development. We do that through a range of publications, various different membership services, and we also represent our members in industry forum like the IMO, where we have NGO status. And safety is very important to us, and I'm really pleased to be joined here by Nick and John, hi guys, who are from IMPA, the International Pilots Organization, and they are going to be sharing some of their knowledge about pilot ladder safety. So thanks for coming, and I'm just a little bit jealous that you guys are both afloat and I'm sitting in a house. So well done. This is a interactive webinar. Your microphones and your cameras will not work, but you please do write in and we will deal with as many questions as we can. There are some handouts available for you, one of which is the recent copy of the Navigator, which focuses on pilots. It's not the first one we've done on pilotage. We did one a few years back, and that's also available as a handout. And there is a safety campaign document, a PDF from IMPA. If you're watching this as a recording, those documents are freely available from either the Nautical Institute or the IMPA website. So please feel free to download those. When the webinar is finished, there will be a little pop-up survey. Really appreciate if you take the 2 minutes to fill it out and let us know what we can improve on. Probably a couple hours after the webinar finishes, you will get an email saying, thank you very much for attending. Within that email will be a certificate with your name on it, so feel free to download that. This is being recorded. The recording will be publicly available on our YouTube channel, but please allow probably till the end of the day tomorrow for that to be up there. It is a safety campaign, so please feel free to share that with all your friends and colleagues to get the message out. And you are not alone. There are over 1,000 of you out there. So when you do write in with your questions, if you can keep them as succinct as possible, we'll get to as many as we can. So on that note, it is my great pleasure to introduce Nick Cutmore, who is the IMPA Secretary General. He has been the Secretary General of IMPA since 1999. He's been involved in many safety campaigns over the years, not least ladders year after year after year after year, and he'll tell you some about that. I worked with Nick at both the IMO and IALA, so we go back a few years, and before that he was with Trinity House. Captain John Pern is an Associate Fellow of the Nautical Institute and the Vice President of IMPA. He started his pilotage career in 1979. He then went back to sea, research ships in Antarctica, before coming back into pilotage, where he now serves currently as a pilot in Milford Haven. He is the IMPA Vice President and he chairs the IMPA Safety Committee. So a man who knows a lot about safe ladders. Now, unfortunately, a few things about unsafe ladders, but we'll talk about that in the Q&A. So Nick, on that note, I will let you start your presentation.
Okay, thank you, David. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from the River Thames in London. My name is Nick Cutmore, and I'm the Secretary General of IMPA, a professional technical body in consultative status at IMO. I'm not a pilot, nor have I been a pilot, and that's why John is here, because he's the guy who climbs the climb. I don't normally do this kind of thing, which you'll notice as we go along today, but David prevailed and said this would be a good idea, and I'm grateful to the Nautical Institute for facilitating it. IMPA is an association of national pilot associations. We have 55 national member countries representing 8,500 pilots worldwide. So if we could go to the next slide, please, David.
Yeah.
This next slide has absolutely nothing to do with pilot ladders. I just thought it might cheer you up or make you envious. This is where I'm speaking to you from. This is our office on the Thames, on the Wellington. This is a 1934 built sloop, which saw 6 years of service in World War II, mainly as an Atlantic convoy escort. Only 1,000 tons, probably not the sort of thing you want to be bashing across the North Atlantic in winter. So next slide, please, David. This is why I'm in London. I sit here at IMO as the permanent representative for the pilots. IMPA, like the Nautical Institute, is an NGO there, and we've had consultative status since 1973. And just another scene setting slide, please, David. This is the main auditorium in IMO looking towards the podium. There's over 160 member states. With us NGOs, we sit at the back in the cheap seats. IMPA like to think we have possibly the most current and valid onboard experience amongst delegations, because it's our policy that pilots speak. I very rarely speak at IMO. Our executive attend and they do the talking. A lot of delegations are otherwise composed of diplomats, retired Navy officers, civil servants and academics. So that's enough chit chat. Here's what we're going to discuss today. Next slide, please. Most years, IMPA loses members. They are killed or maimed in accidents, and the numbers here, I'm not sure how clearly they show, but you can see the general numbers year on year. And it was quite interesting. 2012 was the last time SOLAS was amended, and we really did feel in 2014 and 2015 we might have turned the corner, but it was a false dawn and we are pretty well back to where we were before. Not all pilots are killed by defective or poorly rigged ladders, just most. And before you wonder why we don't use helicopters more, there's 3 helicopter fatalities in these statistics too. However, we need to balance this against the numbers of acts of pilotage carried out every year by our members, and this runs into the millions. So we need to kind of balance this as well. And the final point I want to make looking at these stats is that the last person on the list, Captain Timothy Murray, left 5 children under the age of 10. So can we go on to the next slide, please, David? We're going to look at some of the examples of what pilots encounter. And here I would stress again, the main theme today: a great deal of pain could be avoided by basic prudent seamanship. Just 2 things really I want to say. It's about looking at the ladder when it's deployed, and secondly, looking at how it's secured to the ship. I don't want to get into centimeters here or specifications for materials. That's for the naval architects, outfitting yards and surveyors who ought to be looking at the regulations. We're going to be talking about, as it said on the banner for this webinar, straightforward seamanship issues. So can we go on to the next slide, please, David? These are typically some of the things that pilots see. the two on the left show failures, and to the right, a ladder about to fail through, sorry, I should have said in the center. I think these have been rearranged. The two either side have failed. The one in the center is about to fail. You can see the way the D shackles are secured to the deck, hard by the coaming. It guarantees that all subsequent replacements are going to fail at the same point. And please excuse the quality of the pictures. You'll understand pilots seeing this stuff have very little time to record what nearly killed them. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, there's some interesting stuff here. The bar that you can see top right has been jammed between the side ropes. The whole weight of the ladder and the pilot is now dependent on the chock seizings, which only exist to keep one tread horizontal. The crew think the handrails have the strength to take this weight, but maybe haven't thought about a pilot boat or a tug leaning in on the ladder. And I'd like to ask the question, who signed off the white bar? Is that a class approved or a flag state approved bar that's been inserted there? You can see the coaming isn't radiused there to ease the corner. And some of the others you can see far left. This is a failed accommodation ladder that is far from unusual. Failure of the falls. The ladder in the center looks almost new, and this again is not that unusual. And bottom right, this vessel and her sisters' main decks were widened with this new tumble home effect, and this is the how do I say, the solution of the crew to making the ladder hang against the hull. Well, it was their thoughts anyway. I think that's everything I've got to say about that. So can we go on to the next slide, please, David? On the left, you can see the man ropes are trapped behind the ladder before it's reached main deck. And there's just one magnet holding on there. The other two pictures need no comment, really, except that these were both clearly defective before they were deployed. There's no doubt about that. No one looked, no one cared. And pilots find a close correlation between what they find on the bridge and the condition of the ladder that they just climbed. Can we have the next slide, please? All I need to say is this company announced last quarter profits in 2021 of $5.9 billion. For IMPA, pilot ladders are a consumable. They cost a few $100s. They should be scrapped after 30 months. People should not be considering trying to repair them on board. They are part of the ship safety equipment. They need regular inspection and they need clean, dry storage between use. And quite interestingly, this morning, I opened my mail and I got the MIIB Safety Digest. And on page 16, there was a general piece on over 200 ladder incidents reported to them in 2021. And hey presto, they focus on two issues. Number one, frayed and damaged side ropes, a visible defect. And number two, they stress the need to secure to a proper deck strong point. These are simple basics which would save so much pain. Next slide, please, David. This is the last of my horror picture book. This is the so-called trapdoor arrangement when a pilot ladder is used in combination with an accommodation ladder. There's 2 points here. First one is SOLAS requires that the pilot ladder continues for 1.5 meters above the platform. And number 2, nowhere does it suggest that pilots need to limbo outboard round steelwork that the unthinking naval architect has placed in his or her way. There have been 2 successive fatalities on these arrangements, and this has now led to direct action by some pilots. Twice in past months, pilots have declined to board Maersk vessels in the UK. In one case, the crew took their oxyacetylene torch to cut away the inboard bar, which we didn't propose or even endorse. And in the other case, a 400-meter vessel had to anchor and then reschedule its European calls. Maersk have now redesigned the platform for their whole fleet, and new ones are appearing. Could we go to the next slide, please, then, David? Each year, we conduct a safety campaign. We do it in October. The reason for that is that is trying to get similar conditions north and south of the equator. Pilots report on all the ladders they used during that period. As you can see, we've got something over 3,000 reports there. They do it instantly on an app. This summary sheet here gives you typical numbers, but the key one is the 13% non-compliance level. That's pretty constant year on year. And we have to remember, every defective ladder shown here has been signed off by class, flag and state. We send this survey optimistically every year to IMO, and I've just submitted this one to NCSR in June. We don't necessarily blame crews for this state of affairs. It's a systemic failure to design, build and maintain SOLAS compliant kit. And often the crew is trying to make do with what is provided. And I would kind of link this inability to move the topic forward with the inability of the industry to make progress within closed spaces, deaths. This is not unique in our world. We need to remember too that pilots are not the only people to use these arrangements. They're used by crew, agents, surveyors, and many others. And as you will know, we have seen accounts of crew dying using defective ladders, especially during the pandemic when they've been trying to read their own draft marks when they cannot go ashore. And I have to do a kind of hands up at this point because pilots are part of this continuing problem. They fail to comment or report, and 2 factors create this. And number 1, pilots are can-do people who don't sometimes pause to consider that they're perpetuating matters. And the other thing is many pilots are ex-masters with a great deal of sympathy for the people that they are going to assist. Can we go to the next slide, please, David? Okay. So all I've done so far is whinge. What are IMPA trying to do about all this? Well, this is one of our oldest efforts. You'll all be familiar with this. This is its 4th incarnation. It's downloadable, free, in English, Spanish and French from our website. We'll come to that in a moment. And we do have an unofficial version in Cantonese. We're currently working on an update to present to IMO. John's committee are working on this. We're doing this because China put a paper into MSC, that's the Maritime Safety Committee at IMO, not Mediterranean Shipping Company, and proposing to reopen SOLAS, SOLAS Regulation 23. and one of their comments was about the need to freshen up the poster. I have to say, we submitted comments on China's paper. The task is stalled at MSC, and listening to MSC earlier today, I was not optimistic that we were going to get very far with it, and it's already been held over from MSC 104. IMPA has also just commissioned Southampton University to conduct trials on various fixing arrangements for ladders, especially at mid-length. We also have just finished our prodding of ISO to revise their standard 799 on pilot ladders, which is now a much bigger 3-part document, which also deals with issues like ladder maintenance. So we have got effort on many fronts going forward. Could I have the next slide, please, David? So I've talked about SOLAS and other stuff. Where can you access some of this information? You can go on our website, and if you go to the boarding arrangements and procedures area, you can browse and roam through that without a password. There's a great deal more on there besides ladder stuff about our policies on bridge resource management and such like. But that really brings me to the end of my presentation. So I think there's a couple more slides, but that's me done. Thank you, David.
Right, so thanks very much for that, Nick. And I'll just echo your comments about the absolute millions of operations that pilots do very successfully, and the millions of ladders that are rigged annually correctly. But John, one of the points that has been made is pilot ladders deteriorate slowly in most cases. So why aren't people observing, or why aren't the people who are observing not correcting this problem?
Pilots often observe ladders that are in poor condition. Quite often they report them to the master before they get on the vessel and will decline to board the vessel. It's quite alarming that quite often then a pilot ladder suddenly appears on the deck that's been kept for inspections. So we do find a lot of bad pilot ladders which we bring to the attention of the master, and say quite often it's alarming that there is a good ladder available, but it's not being used because it's being kept aside.
Right, so they would have a good condition ladder in the forecastle to wheel out for inspections.
That's quite normal, that, yes, unfortunately.
Okay, and if a ship is delayed, surely Nick mentioned that the cost of a ladder is probably less than a couple grand, even less than a grand. Surely the costs would be so much more significant if a vessel was delayed.
Absolutely, yeah. It's quite normal for a ship to miss the tide. If they, especially if they're caught tight for the tide when boarding the pilot. If the pilot can't get on board and the ship is delayed and misses the tide, the cost is obviously quite significant. And Nick also mentioned some of the trapdoor arrangements that some pilots had declined to use, and the ships had to reroute to other ports in other countries to discharge the cargo. So the cost of doing that must have been quite significant. And had they had the compliant arrangement in place the first time, the cost would have been averted.
That's a good point. So, John, and I will pick on you, Nick, but John, if one was going to report an issue, I mean, you mentioned it's reported to the master. Who else would you report a poor ladder to?
Well, around the world, many pilotage organisations now have their own reporting system. speak for the one in the UK that we use. It's an app developed by the UK IMPA, and we report any ladder deficiencies, and that report done on the app goes straight to the Port Authority and also to the MCA, and the MAIB will get copies as well. And so those reports can be made instantaneously from the vessel. So if your ladder is particularly poor, then unfortunately the master could find himself having a visit from a port state control inspector quite so shortly afterwards. There's obviously minor issues, we'll just bring up with the master. There's a lot of issues which are quite minor, like the way the ladder's secured. A word with the master, and then he'll have a word with the mate of the boat, and that problem's rectified. And it usually goes no further than that. Other methods of reporting it are the Mars system that the Nautical Institute employ, which is a good way of him if they're not particularly individually significant, but it might show a trend if for example the heaving lines aren't deployed properly. If a lot of pilots are reporting this, then a trend can be spotted through the Mars system, which can then be brought to the attention of the industry.
Okay, thanks, John. Nick, you work at the IMO. How many other flag administrations have this sort of reporting app? Do you know?
Other pilot administrations or flags or ports?
Yeah, the pilots associations. Do some of your other members use the same technology?
I would think at least half of them do around the world, and they're different. And we also have the capacity between member groups where pilots will contact other pilots in other countries and say, this ship is bound for you and you want to watch X, Y, and Z. So quite a number do, but I think it's what John said was very significant in terms of the MAIB digest, to say that MAIB said that they'd had 200 reports, that's essentially UK, I guess, in 2021 alone. So it's a good system where it's applied.
Okay, thanks. And I'm just looking at some of the questions that are coming in from the audience. John says, can Nick expand further on why pilots appear reluctant to refuse to board vessels that deploy ladders in poor or dangerous conditions? Does IMPA have statistics on the number of refusals?
No, we don't keep statistics on the refusals, but we do say to pilots, we're quite firm with them and say, any doubt, just bear off and ask them to re-rig, adjust, or come up, go to anchor. It's not worth the risk. As I said in the presentation, a lot of what you find when you get up to main deck level, you can't see from waterline. So if you're suspicious about it, we say, communicate with the ship and see what they're prepared to do.
Okay, thank you for that. Mark has asked, why not report defective ladders directly to PSC, Port State Control?
That's something that does happen already, but Port State Control is a very variable quality item, if I might say so. Our view of Port State Control, the best one that we encounter is in Australia, to the extent that you won't notice Australia appear in our fatalities table, and to the extent that one management company telephoned me to ask about the special pilot boarding mandate and laws in Australia because they'd had so many ships detained there. And I said, there are no special rules, and they wouldn't believe me. And I said, just follow SOLAS, you'll be fine. And I wrote, they wanted it in writing from me, and I didn't hear any more, but Australian Port State Control have no compunction in detaining a ship. We've had a number of ships there. One case in Port Botany was 3 days waiting for a new pilot ladder, which they then had to have flown out by a helicopter. That's a salutary lesson, and it's a huge amount of money for something as cheap as a ladder.
Yeah, you would have thought that would have made a lot of sense. Okay, we've got a number of questions coming in about the role of the safety management system. So what is the role of the safety management system and in fact the DPA? One of the comments is that there should be more specific guidance, ship-specific guidance in the SMS on how to deploy and inspect pilot ladders. What are the thoughts about that? John, maybe we start with you.
Yeah, I think that'd be a tremendous development. Many vessels, it just says comply with current regulations. If the SMS actually stated what the current regulations were and what the vessel responsibilities were for the maintenance and storage, for example, that would be rather than just a simple one-liner. I think that would be a tremendous development.
If I can say something, yeah. David, I think that might be a takeaway from for us at IMO, to try and weave that in at the next revision.
I suppose it would also make inspections a lot simpler. So, if the class inspectors came on board and they were comparing what was in the SMS to what was actually happening on board, if it was more specific, that would help. Now, John, here's a scenario. Third mate comes down to man the boarding. The ladder has already been put out by the bosun, standing by. You've got your safety equipment, and that's fine. However, when the third mate comes down and sees that something's not right, maybe it's too frayed where it goes over the side of the ship, what's his responsibility?
One would expect his responsibility, as he sees an unsafe action or an unsafe scenario, he should have the ability to say stop. We'd hope that within the culture on the vessel, that even such a junior officer would have the ability to stop an operation if he felt it was unsafe. And you would hope that he would use his level of seamanship to stop that operation.
And we know that pilot boarding areas are notoriously tricky and congested. Would an average master have a plan B in mind should something be found to be defective?
Quite often, when you do report a defective ladder, there's usually quite a period of silence on the radio, and then for example, if it's a combination, when you find that the accommodation ladder is rigged over the top of the ladder, so you physically can't climb up, and they tell you that that's the only way they can rig the ladder. And you usually find once you say, well, sorry, Captain, it's unsafe to board, that miraculously they find another way of doing it. And I'll be honest, to be fair, most masters try their best, and it's not a criticism of masters by any means. Most will try their best, but if they're caught on the hop in a difficult situation, it's sometimes it's difficult for them to react quickly. But for the most part, a solution is found eventually.
Okay, thank you. Nick, one for you. This is from Graham. Would IMPA consider publicly naming and shaming the non-compliant companies as part of the annual reports? Now, I suppose that could be the shipping companies, it could even be the ladder manufacturers, or even the class societies who don't catch the defaults.
Wow, this is a... we did do a little subversive study, and we looked at flags and a lot of other issues under flags, and when we'd harvested all this data and we sorted it, we found that it didn't actually bring the results that you might expect. That what you might call premier flags had as many, if not more, defects than what you might call substandard flags. And it was the same. I'm sorry, we kind of focused a bit on Maersk there with those pictures, but I mean, the camera doesn't lie. We have had a number of issues. Early on in our discussions with Maersk, they wanted to sue us for use of these pictures, and we said, go ahead, you won't look very smart. It's something that we discuss periodically, but it's a very touchy area. Likewise, we've spoken to IACS about the failure to comprehend the level of defects that are passing their inspectors by. But ladders are not, if I can just drift away from ladders a little bit, ladders are not the only place where we find things on board ships are non-compliant. John will tell you about pilot cards he reads, which do not provide what IMO mandates. I mean, the pilot card provides information, but say a stern power, it's nowhere near the what's the wretched thing, M25, the 75% stern power. We see ships coming in with just over 22% stern power. So we have a whole area where ships don't comply with what the regulatory bodies are setting out. Yeah, naming and shaming, that's tricky. We have a good relationship with the ship owners at the moment, and we find them quite collaborative of late about issues like this. The ICS have published their own, if I can find it, you know, they publish stuff like this, pay for it. They're anxious as us that things are correct. Yeah, we've had run-ins with a couple of companies, one of the cruise companies particularly, who offered our president, Simon Pelletier, a pilot ladder which was secured with cable ties. He was not amused, but we dealt directly with their vice president for safety, who was mortified. So to summarize, it's something on our mind, and we chew it over, but we have to weigh up whether we're going to improve things at the sharp end. That's the key thing, or just antagonize somebody.
I also think naming can be counterproductive, because companies who aren't named and shamed think by implication that they haven't got a problem. Whereas if you highlight the problem rather than the person or the company, I think everybody will then look to see whether they have a problem rather than think they're off the hook.
Yeah, that's a good point, John. And of course, you mentioned the Nautical Institute's MARS scheme. That is a confidential, it's not anonymous, but it is a confidential reporting scheme. So if you do see something, if you're a ship's crew or you're a pilot, and you just want to raise awareness of it without naming and shaming, if you submit it to those MARS reports, we'll try to get that broadcast as best we can. John, this might be one for you. It's from Leo. Why do we keep using manila rope, which deteriorates easily? I understand we are not using polyprop, but is there not a better alternative?
I'm not an expert on rope, but man-made fibers do deteriorate in sunlight, whereas natural fibers tend not to. So I think, you know, all different fibers have their good and bad points. I don't think we've actually come up with anything better than man-made fibers just yet.
Okay. And Nick, I think you work with some ISO organization on a standard for the construction of pilot ladders.
Yeah, the International Standards Organization have a standard 799, which was quite old. And when we revised SOLAS in coming into force date in, I think it was July 2012, we said to ISO, you need to revise 799. And we've only just, I think it's within the last week, finalised its revision. One of our members in Australia and one of our American members drove this along through a very painful progress, and it's expanded considerably into 3 volumes, and it's now cross-referenced by IMO. But there is an issue, and I think it was referenced by one of your questioners, one of the written questions you gave to me, that there has been legal challenge to some of the IMO stuff, in that it's recommendations rather than mandated, and ISO comes under this category as well, in its cross-reference from SOLAS and A1045. One of the things we're going to have to tackle at IMO is to say ships shall provide XYZ, not should provide. This is allowed wiggle room for lawyers, and in our response paper to IMO, commenting on China's proposals, which we liked, we have said this is one thing we are going to have to tackle, that it's mandated, especially the A1045, which is attached to SOLAS. You know, we've been shocked at how lawyers have picked this apart and said, well, you don't have to provide a ladder like this. We've been astonished.
Interesting point about that. There's a question come in from Ian, and he says, when trading worldwide, I had often put new pilot ladders on the stores list. On many occasions, the ladder supplied by the local chandler obviously did not meet the correct specification regarding spreader and step sizes. Can local pilots influence local chandleries?
I think we got limited ability to challenge chandleries, but it's something that we come across. You get a lot of knockoff gear on ships. I heard about anchors that, you know, failed or were missing from hawse pipes after long passages, and were found to be knockoffs. And we have the same with ladders. We know of reputable companies. One of them is providing test samples for our project with Southampton University, and they are exasperated. They are trying to provide good products to the necessary standards, and it's all stamped, certificated and labelled, and they said we're being undercut by products which don't meet the spec, which have bogus certificates of compliance, and chandlers are supplying. I'm going to write that down, David, as another area about whether there's anything we can do about the supply. But these are commercial things. It's very difficult to interpose yourself in that sort of arena.
Sure. So what does how would a ship's crew be able to spot a poor ladder that had a false certificate? Or is that something for class and surveyors?
That's really for class and surveyors, yeah. Sorry, John.
I would say it's very difficult for the ship's crew to spot that kind of thing. You know, as Nick was saying, it's something for class and surveyors that need to be on the ball for, really. You know, we've all, you know, you wouldn't buy a high class electronic piece of kit from the local sort of backstreet market, yet they'll buy pilot ladders because from a chandler who will source them from a cheaper source. And they're not expensive items to start with, but when the good quality ones are undercut by inexpensive fake copies, it's very difficult for the seaman on board to spot the difference. And often they come with fake certificates as well, which is another issue.
Yeah, and I think most companies who have a safety quality department will certainly have to think about how they ensure that what they're buying is actually a reasonable product. Got a question here from Andre, and this goes back a little bit, I think, when you were talking about the reporting. And I happen to know that Andre is a pilot, but he says reporting a vessel that's still on board puts a pilot in a difficult position, do you always advise the master that he is being reported? So John, probably one for you.
Yes, I do. I always, if I've got an issue with a ladder, the first point of contact is to discuss it with the master. And if the issue can't be resolved, then I'll inform him that we're required to report it to the local authorities, which is in the UK is something we are actually required to do.
Okay, thank you. And a comment from Mandeep. Nick, you had mentioned that best practice is to discard a pilot ladder after 30 months. Is there any regulation for that? How has that been defined?
Well, it's been defined in the new ISO 799 because we were very uncomfortable with the original 799, where it made provision for how to repair ladders, treads with slotted ends that could be fitted in. And with no disrespect to crews today, the level of seamanship or rope work and bosun's work, if you like, necessary to repair a pilot ladder is not available like it used to be. And again, because they're so cheap, the logical thing is to just put it in a skip and get another one. It's a consumable to us, and in the new ISO 799, I think it refers to 30 months in there, and that's plenty long enough.
Yeah, and I must say, Nick, you talk about pilots being their own worst enemies. Crews are the same way. I spent nearly 20 years at sea, and it's your instinct to always try to make do. And the big thing here is you've got a human life hanging on the other side of that rope, and that's what you got to keep asking yourself.
And it's not just a pilot either. It's often crew or other people. We don't keep stats on crew fatalities or surveyors, or port state control officers use this stuff as well, and they seem oblivious to some of the stuff they're climbing. But it's a lot of people use it, not just pilots.
And I think for the crew, you have to think, would I be happy with one of my loved ones climbing up the side of this, knowing the condition and how it's rigged? So very, very important stuff. So a lot of questions now coming in. I'll just read this one, but from Jonathan. Has there been any thought on how to improve pilot ladder arrangements? So do we have the best tools, the best techniques, the best advice?
You mentioned to me earlier, David, before we went live, about a Lloyd's competition which they set up some time ago.
I'll just clarify that's Lloyd's Register.
Yeah. Sorry, Lloyd's. What did I say? Lloyd's List. Sorry, Lloyd's Register. A competition for students and looking at improving pilot boarding arrangements, and some of the stuff that came up was astonishing. Two things. One was a one-piece molded ladder made of very modern materials. It was fantastic. And the other one was a securing system for the deck, which would have indicated to the pilot from sea level that the ladder was secure by a pair of stanchions which acted as jamming cleats. The first thing, the ladder, of course, would have needed to have gone through an approvals process at IMO, and that kind of stalled that. But the deck arrangement, I think, will be great to see developed by a company and going worldwide. It was really good. So occasionally there is innovative thinking and stuff comes up like that. But I know there's also criticism. Ladders are still made of natural fibers, but natural fibers have proved themselves. We've seen ladders made, for instance, with extruded steps, which when they're subject to impact damage from pilot boat bulwarks, they're permanently deformed. Hardwood is very durable. These materials, they're old, but they're good.
Okay, excellent. And here's one for you, John. Talking about the old technology and the new. Franz asks, are drones considered to be used to check the ladder condition before boarding? How about that?
Well, that's a new one to me. Fair enough. I've not heard of that one before. One thing we do certainly in my port is when we go alongside the vessel is we ask the crew whether it has been rigged. We call on the radio, is your boarding arrangements in compliance with SOLAS? And then before the pilot steps on the ladder, we ask for confirmation by the crew on the deck whether it's been secured properly. But we haven't done drones yet, I'm afraid. But maybe one for the future, that.
Okay, I'll leave that to you to consider. Pashant asks, shackles versus lashings. John.
Okay, I'll take that one. It's yes. I think you'll find there's quite a diverse view on this, even amongst pilots at the moment. Some pilots prefer lashings because they're securing the side ropes, which are rated to 24 newtons, whereas the shackles, all the weight is on the step, which is only rated to 8 kilonewtons, and also all the weight is borne by the whippings, and so they're more likely to defect the ladder. But the other argument is shackles don't wear out, whereas ropes do. So it's something we're looking into. We've actually commissioned some studies at the moment to looking at different ways of securing ladders, either by strops, shackles, or by lashings using rolling hitches. So a pilot, Troy Evans, who sadly died recently, did a lot of studies on his own regarding some different methods of securing ladders. And so we've taken this on board and we've tried to do it in a more scientific way and employed Southampton University to do the studies for us. So I think we might have a more definitive answer in a few months' time, hopefully.
Okay, thanks. A question from Jonathan. There has been an increase of pilot launches not having deck handles available or not having deck hands available. Is this a concern to IMPA, and have any incidents occurred because of this?
Okay, I'll take this one again. In my port, we have 2 deck hands on deck, one forward and one after the pilot when he goes out on deck. And this was because about 30 years ago, one of the pilots went in and they weren't able to recover the pilot from the water because one man on his own wasn't able to operate the recovery equipment. So because of that, we now have 2 on deck. Now, I will concede that recovery equipment has come on quite a way in the last 30 or 40 years, but yeah, it is a concern when there's nobody on deck to help the pilot get on and off the ladder. And simple things like lifting the ladder up away from the fendering on the pilot boat is very important to stop the ladder being caught, or just to guide the pilot as he steps back off the ladder onto the boat, or to help to pass up his bag or something like that. So yeah, it's these are done, risk assessments are done locally, unfortunately, but obviously through experience we've decided 2 on deck is the best way for us.
Okay, thanks, John. Nick, I know that we've had a brief discussion in the past because there's some controversy around whether a pilot boat should remain under the ladder on station or move aside so that the pilot has presumably a softer landing in the water rather than on deck. Were you doing some research into that?
Yes, we've commissioned research from HR Wallingford to study this because our members have mixed views on it, and we don't impose a view on the best way to do this sort of stuff. But we have had members maimed who have fallen from defective ladders onto the decks of pilot boats, and the injuries have been suffered, severe trauma through impact onto the decks. But the pilots want the boats there because they fear for their survival, obviously a ship moving at 5 or 6 knots, you reach the stern gear pretty quickly. And whilst you've got a self-inflating life jacket, what's going to happen when you get in amongst the stern gear? We wanted to provide some sort of science in the same way that we commissioned Southampton University to test shackles, lifting strops and rope rolling hitches. We've said to HR Wallingford, can you do some research, which they've agreed to do, on what I might term the behaviour of bodies alongside a moving ship, so that it can guide groups on whether it will be better for the pilot launch to bear off as soon as the pilot is on the ladder, so that if he does fall, if the ladder fails, he falls into the water and he's got a better chance of being uninjured. He'll be very wet and upset, but he won't suffer trauma injury through impact with a pilot boat deck or coach house.
Okay. I've got a question here from Prani, and this may be the last question we have time for. What happens if the trapdoor for the combination ladder has not been provided as per design? How much grace period is available to modify the arrangement?
Well, I think we've said it already. Pilots have declined to board these arrangements, and we would support that because we've seen the fatalities, 2 successive ones in the US from the same design, and we would support members who decline to board them. So the ship takes its chances. It turns up at a port and the pilot declines. That's it. Because honestly, we're 10 years on from the revision of SOLAS, and people have hung on to grandfather rights and said, oh yeah, you know, we haven't had an opportunity to change that. The key point today, these are people's lives, and you try and climb these wretched things where you have to hang outboard over the side. It's out with the regulations, and we've seen enough. And what do I say? Pilots are voting with their feet.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, you know, certainly speaking personally, the grace period's expired. Yeah, I'm not prepared to put my safety or my family's welfare at risk for the commercial benefit of somebody else. And if it's not safe, we won't use it.
I think that's a great note to end on, John. Thank you both, John and Nick, for raising this awareness, for all the good work that you do in putting these guidelines together and doing your surveys. Nick, you mentioned your work at the IMO and how important it is to actually have active mariners there. And I think you're right. You're the best organization in terms of bringing, you know, wet feet into the IMO. And you know, I know from working with you there, you've made some excellent interventions. You know, and some of the times the people you have at the meeting had been on board a ship earlier that day or the day before, and that's just absolutely invaluable. So that's fantastic. Just in closing, I would like to remind everybody that the Nautical Institute is a member organization. It's for individual members, so please consider joining us as a member. I will also remind everybody that IMPA is a membership organization of national authorities, and if your national authority isn't a member of IMPA, you might start asking why that is and what you can do to become a member. Nick, do you want to say anything more about that?
No, that's fine. Thank you for that plug for us, David, and thank you and the Nautical Institute for hosting this event. As I said earlier on, this is not our bag normally, so we appreciate it as a means of getting a message across, and thank you for your hosting skills. It's been very useful, and we've got stuff out of it. I got some notes here, so great job.
Okay, Nick, there are a lot of questions have come in, and I will share those with you confidentially after the webinar in case there are some other points that you want to pick up from that. So thank you both. Thank IMPA for doing all the good work that it does. Thank you everybody for tuning into this, and join the Nautical Institute. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.